Well, ladies and gentlemen, the John Deere 350B project is coming to a close. The next step is to install the fully rebuilt final drive and clutch assembly onto the machine. I made this handy tool. I saw a picture of it in the manual somewhere, but I couldn't find it. Basically, well, you see how it works. There's two holes, two half-inch holes in the final. All the others are 5/8. And these half-inch holes are a lot longer, and it allows you to put a rod through it for stabilization like that. And I put an eye hook there for some rotational capabilities, and you see it bounces pretty decent. So I'm going to see how far I can finagle this in here. So this is coming together pretty easily so far. So I've got it more or less into place. First I swung it such that the drive shaft got into the hole there, and then I slid some 5/8 studs into a couple of the holes, or just two of the holes. One of them has a nut on it to prevent it from sliding off. I'll see how much farther I can get it in here with the engine hoist holding it up, and then I'll take the hoist off and push it on the rest of the way. Oh, also the brake band is like all the way out, like as adjusted open as it can get. It's like kind of sprung against the housing that it's in, so that should not interfere with the brake drum. Also the spline drive shaft just may interfere with the female end that it's going into, so you might need to give this a little rotate to help it get in there. So I got the hoist out of the way, and when I took out my my lifting bracket, I put in these half-inch threaded rods through those lifting holes, and I've got it in even further. One thing you have to keep in mind is how everything can go this way and that every which way. So, and of course gravity's going to pull it down, so I had this little floor jack that I put in there just to get the weight off of these screws, and I put a bar between the track frame and the hub there and gave it a push. Now it's in. And the next obstacle is the brake band. It's hitting up there and it's free down there. So just a little more fiddling, just take your time and it'll send itself right in. So here we are, it's coming together. As you see, I got the final on. I decided to add a nice little squirt of black RTV on there just for the hell of it. These clutch housings aren't entirely weather tight. There is the little 1/8" NPT drain plug on the bottom. There's the cover up top, which may or may not have a gasket. I made some gaskets for it out of some inner tube. But also there's the brake rod. There's a brake rod there that goes into the housing, and there's a boot on it, but of course that's not going to be sealed perfectly. So anyway, I guess the RTV isn't necessary, but I put it on there anyway. Now, I didn't really show anything else of the installation of this because it's really just finicky dicking around with it. And then I put some longer bolts and studs in here and kind of drew it in rather than just trying to push it, because you'll never get it that way. The last thing to keep in mind is right behind this little dent here, that's where the pivot rod is for all the clutch brake linkage on the inside. Make sure the rod finds that hole, because the rod on its own flops around a lot, so you have to help it get in its home there. I also put a little bit of grease in the hole on the back side of that final drive. Then I installed the rock guard. Very simple, just 2 bolts. Installed the sprocket. I put plenty of Loctite, or not the opposite of Loctite, anti-seize on the hub face and all the bolts. Now the next step, I had to torch cut this thing off to get the final out, and it also helped getting it back in, so I got to weld it back together. I additionally torch cut a bevel on there and ground it smooth so I have something to weld into. I bolted it back into place with the existing 2 bolts. So the last step before putting on the track is putting on this ROPS bar mounting bracket. Now, let's see, 2 little side notes. Firstly, now is a really good time or even before you put the sprocket on, now it's a good time to take that pipe plug out and fill this final drive with oil, gear oil, because it's a hell of a lot more of a pain with the track on it. The manual says to use John Deere Spec 303 oil for everything except the engine, but I use gear oil in the finals and in the transmission. From what I've read on the forums and such online, part of the reason John Deere went with Spec 303, or superseded by John Deere High Guard, I believe. And they went with that, so it's a universal fluid. You can't screw it up. It's decent in the summer, it's decent in the winter, but like an all-season tire or whatever, it's really not perfect for certain applications. I'm not running this in the Arctic, so I'm not worried about gear oil turning into paste. And also, I want gear oil in there. Gear oil is supposed to go with gears, especially the final drive, which is under the heaviest load of everything. So I just used 80-90 gear oil. The other thing, there's a couple bolt holes in these final drives that, for whatever reason, they're a straight bored hole with a threaded insert in it. And those holes are these holes, the top and bottom holes for this swinging drawbar. And also, see this bar there? That's like a bracket for the belly guard. And there's this hole here, which goes on the bottom of the swinging drawbar. And there's another hole further back that goes further up front on the final drive. And those inserts pull out. Why it's not just threaded right into the casting is beyond me. But this swinging drawbar was missing these bolts here, so I was going to put them in, put some new bolts in, but there's no threads in there, so I guess that means the insert pulled out. And then so I was going to take the drawbar off to tap this hole for a bigger thread, but those are screwed up too. I spun that bolt about 10 times and it's not coming out, so the insert's screwed up in there. Same with the bottom one. See, there's the insert right there. That's why it doesn't look threaded. That's the insert pulling out. So I was going to dick around pulling this whole this part of the drawbar off and threading and tapping it. That's a pain in the ass. These bolts don't really hold too much. If you're pulling with the drawbar, the real pull is way up in there. The pivot point for this drawbar, it's a big ass pin. That's where all your pulling strength comes from. This swinging part, this arc here, just guides the drawbar should you want it to swing. And I don't like to swing. I'm just going to put some bolts in these holes to prevent it from swinging. If anything, there's going to be a little bit of downforce on this drawbar if I ever put my pintle hook trailer on here to move it around, or just with a chain kind of angled down, it'll put a little bit of downforce on this. So these aren't under that much stress. So Swamp Yankee fix, I'm gonna pound this back in. I'm gonna leave that just the way it is, and I'm gonna go on the lathe and make 7/8 diameter pins with a little taper on them, and just pound them right in there and in there, and that'll just put a pin thing in there to locate it and just prevent this from moving around too much. Had I realized this when the final drive was off, I could have more easily pulled this drawbar piece off this way, but I didn't. Oh well, not a big deal. So that's what I'm going to do.